Now with these top filters, we have to be particularly careful to make sure that the water is freely flowing back down to the aquarium. In this case we've just taken out the polyfilter, but we'll put it back in again as the pre-filtration, because we don't want the water banking up and going down the back of the tank. And the other thing is that the tank has got a plastic rail that goes around the top of the tank, and then that plastic rail acts like a coping, and you would assume that silicon is filling up that gap above the top of the glass, but it's not always the case. So make sure you don't fill up this level too much. Otherwise, if you get a gush of water going in one direction, then the water can gush towards the back, and the coping can act like a siphon and actually siphon the water down the back of the tank. And it can be particularly hard to locate, particularly if the water is coming out here and then going down the back, and then it goes underneath here, and then you find little dribbles of water coming out here, which distinctly looks like your tank's leaking, but it's not leaking. It's just that either you've allowed water to get underneath the aquarium by overfilling it, or the other thing you've really got to watch too is air stones, because if air stones are going to pop all water up onto the top, and then once the water is up on the top, the water can travel along and then find its way going over the edge again. And even in this case we did see a fair bit of water along the back here. So really keep an eye on air stones, really keep an eye on not overfilling the tank, and really keep an eye on the filters to make sure the water can easily go back down. As I said, we have removed the polyfilter out of this one temporarily, but that'll get put back in again, because you need to make sure that the water is freely going back down this hole, and it's not banking up in this area either, because if it banks up here, once again the water can go out this hole and then find its way across the top and go down the back. And the ultimate way to test if your tank is leaking as well is if you look at the silicon seal right along the bottom. If the tank is leaking, you'll usually see that the silicon seal will change colour in a part where it's obviously not just light, but you'll see it usually go whiter, because the silicon seal is clear along the bottom at the front, which you'll never know at the back. But the chance of silicon just letting go is extremely rare, because silicon is actually a liquid and glass by nature is a liquid. So the only way that the silicon is ever going to let go is if there's actually enough pressure that exceeds the flexibility of the silicon. So it is extremely rare for silicon to just let go. And I've been called out to these tanks several times. They're absolutely beautiful tanks. They're really lovely display tanks. But the things you just got to watch is that the filters aren't too dirty, that you don't fill them up too much, and make sure that you're not getting runoff from the air stones, leading you to believe that the tank's leaking when it's not actually leaking. And the ultimate way to check if it's leaking is to turn off all of the pumps and so forth, and then to mark it with the texter, and then see how long it takes to go down. And if it is actually leaking, the water should just continue running out, and you should see the water actually drop. If it's such a minute amount that you're not noticing any difference over a period of hours, then what you would just assume is that there was an event that caused water to go underneath the bottom here, and then once the water is underneath the bottom here for the perimeter of this whole aquarium, and the water has very little exposure to oxygen, because the water's in a pocket that's underneath the bottom, so the water takes a long time to dribble out of an area like this. So you might think the tank's leaking because it's very deceptive, because you might find you wipe it, and then the next day you wipe it, and the next day you wipe it, and that can go on for literally a couple, if not several weeks, while that body of water that's been washed underneath the aquarium is able to escape through a single point, which is usually there and maybe a little bit on the other end. So just be really cautious. If you go to the Majestic Aquariums website and go to an article called Top Filter Warning, we talk about this a lot more extensively, but it's very rarely a problem. There's just a few things you want to know. So read that article, Top Filter Warning, on the Majestic Aquariums website.